Why did no one look at her when she entered the room? The briefing table stretched long, cluttered with maps, radios, and steaming cups of bitter coffee. A dozen men leaned forward, shoulders tense, eyes narrowed at coordinates inked in red. Their voices carried low, clipped, weighted with the kind of focus only war demanded. But when she stepped inside, silence shifted. Heads turned just enough to acknowledge her presence, then dropped again to their papers. No greetings, no nods, just that careful pause, as if the air itself reshaped around her. She was used to it. Not the silence itself, but the meaning buried inside it. They weren't ignoring her. They weren't doubting her. It was something else. A mixture of respect and fear, laced with the kind of distance people create when someone carries ghosts. And she carried more than anyone here. Her uniform looked the same as theirs, yet it was. It was sharper, pressed, disciplined, as if her body refused to relax the way theirs did. Her boots were laced tighter. Her rifle strap never slipped. Every detail about her screamed control, the kind that came not from pride but necessity. Because if she loosened even one thread, she wasn't sure what would unravel. The colonel's gravel voice cut through. Operation window closes in 36 hours. His finger jabbed at a valley on the map. Insertion here. Target is mobile. Retrieval and exfil to Ridge 3. Air support is conditional. You know what that means. A few nervous laughs. Someone muttered, means we're on our own. The colonel didn't correct him. Her eyes scanned the map. The valley's sharp ridges bled into narrow choke points. She knew this place. She had walked its stone paths before, under a weaker mission with weaker stakes. She had filed warnings afterward, reports no one read. And now here it was again, the terrain she had feared most. She didn't sit. She rarely did in these rooms. Sitting felt too close, too exposed. Instead, she stood at the edge, the folder pressed against her chest. She wasn't just listening. She was memorizing every contour, every word, every pause where the colonel avoided saying what they all knew. Someone asked, and if extraction fails? The colonel's silence lingered longer than the question itself. That told her enough. She didn't flinch. On the outside, she was still expression flat, eyes focused, shoulders squared. But inside, her ribs felt fragile, her lungs heavy. A storm pressed at her chest. And within that storm lived a voice. Her brother. Don't let them think you can't carry it. She blinked, steadied herself. The briefing rolled on. Questions, updates, arguments about timing, voices overlapped. But she thought of the last letter she ever held from him. The words scrawled in uneven ink, handed to her through military mail weeks after he'd already been gone. If you make it, live for both of us. Her jaw tightened. The meeting ended with scraping chairs, muttered curses, half-hearted jokes to mask the fear that crept into every man's gut. They filed out in clusters, shoulders brushing, footsteps echoing down the hall. She stayed, alone in the fatting silence. Her gaze fell again to the valley lines on the map. She traced them with her finger, whispering words no one else would hear. You'll see me, brother. I'll carry this for both of us. A knock broke the stillness, sharp, quick. She turned. The door cracked open. A younger soldier peeked in, barely 20, freckles across his nose, eyes too wide for a place like this. He clutched his helmet like it could protect him from more than bullets. Ma'am, his voice wavered. She didn't answer at first. She let him squirm in the silence before softening just enough to meet his gaze. Yes. He shifted, cleared his throat. They said you're point sniper on this run. She studied him. His posture was stiff, his knuckles white against the helmet. He wasn't just curious, he was afraid. Yes, she said simply. He nodded, but his lips pressed thin. Something else hovered behind his question. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Say it. He swallowed hard, voice dropping almost to a whisper. Is it true you do miss? Her breath stilled for half a second. Then the corner of her mouth moved, not into a smile, not into pride, into something else, something brittle. "Everyone misses," she said. The boy blinked, as if she just shattered a myth he'd been clinging to. He nodded too quickly, muttered something polite, and backed out of the room. The door shut. Her throat tightened. Everyone misses. She had missed once, and the cost of that single miss was the reason she carried silence heavier than anyone else in this base. That night the base dimmed into its usual hum, boots scuffing against dirt, distant engines growling, radios crackling like ghosts. She sat outside, back pressed against the cold concrete wall, her rifle balanced across her knees. The sky stretched endless above her, stars scattered like shrapnel. She stared at them until her eyes blurred, until the shapes turned into memories. Her team moved around her, heading for bunks, gear checks, muttered conversations. Some laughed, some smoked. One hummed a quiet tune that carried like a thread of fragile normalcy. She didn't join them, she never did. They thought she was aloof, distant, untouchable. But the truth was simpler. Words felt like weight, and she couldn't carry more. Still, she noticed them. The one with the old shoulder injury he pretended didn't ache. The medic who touched his rosary every night before sleep. The radio operator who rubbed his wedding ring when he thought no one saw. They all had ghosts. She just kept hers louder. At one point the medic passed her, slowing his step. He glanced at her rifle, then at her face. His lips parted like he wanted to speak. Then he thought better of it and moved on. She watched him disappear into the shadows. For a moment she wished he had spoken, wished someone had dared to pierce the silence. But maybe it was better this way. The mission clock ticked closer, and the weight in her chest grew heavier with every second. At 300 the engine started. The convoy lined up in the dark, headlights carving through dust. The roar was mechanical, familiar, but to her it always sounded like a countdown. She climbed into the last Humvee, rifle slung across her shoulder. Inside the air was thick. No one spoke at first, just gear shifting, tires grinding, radios spitting static. Then slowly, voices emerged. Someone cracked a joke about the coffee back at base. Another cursed the food, laughing about what he'd eat once he was home again. Laughter flickered through the vehicle, brief, fragile. She kept her eyes on the window, on the road slipping into the horizon. But inside her chest tightened. She thought of her brother again, his last words, his smile, his absence. She whispered, low enough no one else could hear, "I'll live for both of us." The convoy slowed as the valley loomed ahead. Her pulse steadied like it always did before danger, not faster, slower, focused. The ridges closed in, high walls of stone pressing the road into a narrow choke. Shadows swallowed headlights. Radios crackled, 2 clicks out. Her hand slid to her wrist, brushing the scar hidden beneath her sleeve. A scar that had come from this very valley months ago. The scar that marked the mission where she had missed. And then she felt it. That silence. Not the ordinary silence of night. Something deeper, unnatural, the kind that made the air itself feel watchful. Her breath slowed. Her skin prickled. She whispered to herself, "It's here." The others laughed still, talking low about nothing important. Engines roared, wheels turned. Her jaw clenched. She leaned forward, voice cutting sharp through the noise. "Stop the convoy." Head snapped. Confusion filled the Humvee. The driver glanced at his sergeant. The sergeant frowned. "Stop," she said again, firmer, unblinking. The sergeant cursed under his breath, then signaled. The vehicle screeched to a halt. Dust rose, hanging in the beams of headlights. A beat of silence. And then the sound. A metallic click, faint, buried, but unmistakable. The kind of sound only someone listening for silence would notice. An IED. She exhaled, slow. Her silence had just saved them. But inside, as the soldiers scrambled out to sweep the road, hearts pounding, voices rising, she said nothing. No congratulations, no explanations. She just stared at the valley ahead, because she knew this was only the beginning. And there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. What happens when silence saves you once, but refuses to leave afterward? The convoy sat frozen in the valley, engines cut, headlights dimmed, dust settled in the cold night air carrying the metallic sting of fear. Soldiers fanned out, boots crunching against rock, scanning with flashlights. Every step was hesitant, every breath held too long. They all knew what that click meant. An IED wasn't just a bomb, it was a message. Someone had been here. Someone had planted it, timed it, buried it with patience and skill, and if there was one, there could be more. The sergeant barked orders, his voice sharp to mask his nerves. Sweep the road, watch for pressure plates, don't bunch up. Men obeyed, but their eyes kept darting back to her. The sniper, the woman who had stopped them seconds before death. She didn't look back. She was already kneeling in the dirt, eyes fixed on the valley walls above. Her hand rested on the scope slung across her shoulder, fingers tracing the cold steel. Because she knew, the device in the dirt was only half the threat, the other half was up there, watching, waiting. Her breath steadied. The night air chilled her skin, carrying the faintest hum of wind through the rocks. Her instincts sharpened. She felt it before she saw it. A shift, a flicker, a silhouette where none should be. Her eye dropped behind her scope, glass pressed cold against her skin. The world narrowed, shadows stretching, until she found it, a figure crouched high on the ridge, motion too precise to be an animal. Her finger hovered near the trigger. But she didn't fire, not yet. Because something in her gut twisted. What if the figure wasn't the enemy? What if it was bait, waiting for her to reveal her position? Her lungs tightened. This was the part no one else understood. The hardest part wasn't pulling the trigger. It was waiting, holding silence long enough to know the difference between instinct and mistake. And she knew mistakes. The scar on her wrist burned at the thought. That old mission, the night her bullet had gone wide. Her brother had been covering her flank then. She missed, and he had paid. Her chest clenched. The sergeant's voice cracked through the radio. Status sniper. Her finger trembled on the trigger. The figure shifted again, lifting something. Metal glinted faintly in the starlight. Not a decoy, not bait, a weapon. Her exhale was steady, measured, controlled. She pulled the trigger. The rifle cracked, shattering the valley's silence. The figure collapsed, rolling against rock before going still. Around her, soldiers froze, heads snapping toward the echo. Then chaos. Gunfire erupted from the ridge opposite, muzzle flashes sparking like fireflies. The valley lit with sound, bullets striking dirt, sparks ricocheting off steel, radios screaming with overlapping calls. She stayed prone, calm in the storm. Her scope swept, hunting targets one by one. Each squeeze of the trigger was precise, deliberate, stripping the ambush apart piece by piece. But even in the rhythm of survival, her mind spun. They hadn't just stumbled into this. They had been expected. The firefight stretched long, then snapped short. Silence fell heavy again, broken only by the groans of wounded men and the hiss of radios. Her team regrouped behind the Humvees, faces pale, sweat mixing with dust. 2 men bled from grazing wounds, nothing fatal, not this time. But the fear in their eyes, that was harder to stitch. The sergeant spat into the dirt, cursing. We were fed bad intel. This was supposed to be clean, goddamn setup. Nobody argued. She leaned against the Humvee, rifle cradled against her chest. Her breathing slowed, but her hands trembled faintly before she hid them against her thigh. She didn't speak, she rarely did. But in her silence, she was already piecing the truth together. The ambush had been too precise. The bomb, too, perfectly placed. Whoever they were after, he knew they were coming. Which meant there was a leak somewhere in the chain. Her throat tightened. She thought of her brother again. He had once told her, "The enemy isn't just out there. Sometimes he wears your flag." She hated that he'd been right. Hours later, the convoy rolled again, slower, more cautious. Every mile stretched like a wire pulled taut. Inside the Humvee, voices were lower now. No jokes, no laughter, just silence and shallow breathing. She sat pressed against the window, eyes tracing the ridges. Every shadow looked armed. Every sound felt like a warning. And inside her, the weight grew heavier. Because the ambush had ripped open something deeper, something she had tried to bury under missions and silence. Her brother's face. The last time she had seen him, they were both on patrol. He had been too eager, too young, carrying courage bigger than his frame. He smiled at her in the darkness, as if war was an adventure, as if nothing could touch him. And then she had missed. She still heard the bullet ricochet, still smelled the smoke, still felt the heat of the blast that followed. And she still saw him, crumpled, eyes wide, breath shallow. He hadn't blamed her, not with his words, not with his final look. But she had blamed herself every day since. That was why silence followed her, because silence didn't accuse, it only reminded. The convoy stopped again before dawn. A makeshift halt near a ridge, far enough from the valley to rest, not far enough to feel safe. Tents went up quickly, radios checked in with command, medics patched wounds, soldiers tried to eat but barely swallowed. She drifted away from them, settling on a rock at the edge of camp, rifle across her knees, eyes scanning horizon. The medic approached after a while. He didn't ask permission. He just sat near her, setting down his pack. For a long while they didn't speak. Finally he broke the silence. "You saved us back there." She didn't answer. "You knew before anyone else." Still she stayed quiet. He sighed, pulling a small tin from his pack. Cigarettes. He lit one, inhaled deeply, then glanced at her. "Do you ever wonder why you're still here?" Her eyes flicked to him, sharp. He held her gaze unfazed. "We've both seen enough, we've both lost enough. And yet here we are, breathing, eating, pretending." Her jaw tightened. He exhaled smoke, the curl of it rising like a ghost. "Sometimes I think the only reason I'm alive is because someone else is, like I'm borrowing air that doesn't belong to me." His words struck deeper than he knew. Because that was exactly how she felt. Every breath she took felt stolen from her brother. Every mission survived felt like theft. She didn't say it aloud. Instead, she whispered, almost to herself, "Everyone misses." The medic glanced at her, confused, but he didn't push. He just nodded, smoked, and let the silence stretch. And in that silence, for the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone. By morning, orders came through. The mission wasn't scrubbed, it was altered. The asset was moving faster than expected. Their window had shrunk from 36 hours to 12. Command's voice through the radio was flat, unbothered by the blood still drying on their uniforms. "Proceed with urgency. You have until nightfall." The sergeant cursed again, kicking dirt. The men groaned, faces drawn. She stood still, absorbing the words. 12 hours. Her gut twisted. The ambush hadn't been a failure. It had been a delay tactic. Whoever they were hunting knew the mission clock as well as they did. Which meant this wasn't just war, this was personal. And somewhere deep down she knew this mission wasn't about the asset anymore. It was about proving something else. To command, to her team, to herself. But most of all, to her brother. She shouldered her rifle, eyes narrowing at the horizon. Because she wasn't just carrying orders. She was carrying him. The day stretched hot, sun bleeding against rock. The convoy moved again, slower than dawn but steadier than night. Every man stayed sharper, eyes wide, fingers tighter on triggers. She sat in silence, watching terrain shift. Her body was still, but inside, her mind replayed that moment on the ridge. The hesitation before she pulled the trigger, the tremor in her finger. It unsettled her, because she wasn't supposed to hesitate. She was the one they trusted not to. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was armor, but for the first time in years cracks had shown. And that thought terrified her more than any ambush. By late afternoon, the convoy neared its next checkpoint, a crumbling village, stone huts half buried in dust, children's toys abandoned in alleys. The kind of place war forgot but never left. As they rolled in, the air shifted again, too still, too quiet. She lifted her scope, scanning rooftops, alleys, windows, empty, silent. But silence never meant safe. Her breath slowed, because she could feel it again. Something here was wrong. And whatever it wasn't just waiting for them. It was waiting for her. What does it mean when silence follows you into places where life should still exist? The village rose from the dust like bones of a forgotten time. Crumbling walls, broken windows, alleys so narrow a child could vanish in them. The convoy slowed to a crawl, engines humming low, tires grinding across rock. Every soldier leaned forward, rifles raised, scanning shadows. But she was already listening. Not to the engines, not to the radios, to the silence. It pressed heavy, unnatural. No dogs barking, no voices echoing, no children chasing the wheels as they often did in villages like these. She whispered so low no one caught it, too quiet. The sergeant raised a fist, halting the line. The Humvees stopped. Dust settled around them, clinging to sweat-soaked skin. "Dismount," he ordered. Boots hit dirt. Soldiers fanned out, hugging walls, eyes cutting through narrow streets. The medic checked rooftops. The radio operator kept his antenna close, murmuring static. She slid out last, rifle in hand. Kneeling briefly, she touched the ground. The dust was disturbed, tracks leading in but not out. Her chest tightened. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was absence. Something or someone had cleared this place. They advanced through the first street, stacked tight against walls. Every window seemed like an eye. Every shadow felt alive. Her scope swept constantly. She traced movement where there was none, waiting for the faintest shift. Her breath slowed, chest rising and falling in rhythm with the weight of her rifle. A memory flickered. Her brother crouched beside her once in a different village, teasing, "You stare too hard at ghosts, sis. Not everything is out to get you." He'd laughed then, she hadn't. Because even back then she knew better. Ghosts didn't hide in silence, people did. The squad split into two elements, weaving through separate alleys. The radio crackled soft updates, clear left, rooftop empty. But nothing was clear. She felt it. Every step pressed against her chest, every glance at the broken toys abandoned in dirt cut sharper than glass. A doll missing an arm, a wooden truck lying on its side. Signs of life ripped suddenly away. Her throat burned. She thought of children she'd once promised safety to, back when she believed words meant more than bullets. And she thought of the letter her brother never got to finish, the one where he wrote of wanting children someday, of building something after the war. Her eyes stung, but she blinked it away. This wasn't the place for grief. The first shot came without warning. A crack split the air, dust spitting from a wall near one soldier's head. He dropped instantly, scrambling behind rubble. "Contact," voices shouted. The village exploded in sound. Bullets tore through silence, ricocheting off stone, cutting the air with death. She was already moving, dropping to one knee, scope rising. The world narrowed, her breathing slowed. Their rooftop, a flicker of motion, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked, a body fell, limp against broken stone. Another flash, alleyway, she pivoted, fired again. The rhythm of precision carried her. But no matter how many fell, more rose. The village wasn't empty, it was waiting. The squad scattered, taking cover in broken doorways behind overturned carts. Shouts echoed. A grenade clanged against dirt, smoke spilling into the street. Her ears rang, but her focus never slipped. Yet through the haze, something gnawed at her the way the attackers moved. Not wild, not desperate, coordinated, too clean. This wasn't random resistance. This was planned. And then it struck her, the ambush in the valley hadn't failed. It had led them here. The firefight stretched brutal, minutes that felt like hours. When the smoke thinned, when the last echoes faded, the village lay scarred, walls shredded, dust hanging thick. Her squad regrouped, breathing heavy, faces drawn with exhaustion. 2 men were wounded. The medic worked quickly, hands steady despite the tremor in his jaw. The radio operator muttered into static, desperate for command to respond. The sergeant paced, cursing under his breath. Intel was wrong again. We walked into a damn nest. She stood apart, rifle still raised, eyes scanning rooftops. Her chest heaved, but not from running, from the weight of realization pressing harder with every heartbeat. They weren't just chasing an asset. They were being drawn deeper. And she was the only one who seemed to feel it. Later, as the sun dipped low, the squad huddled inside the shell of a building. Shadows stretched across cracked walls, dusk glowing in the dying light. The men ate in silence, chewing dry rations, staring at nothing. Fatigue clung to them, heavier than the heat. She sat near the doorway, back to the wall, rifle across her lap. She didn't eat. Hunger had left her long ago. The medic joined her, sliding down beside the doorway. His sleeves were rolled up, arms smeared with blood that wasn't his own. He lit another cigarette, dragging deep before speaking. "You don't look tired." She didn't glance at him. "I'm tired every day," she murmured. He studied her face, lines carved by sleepless nights. "You ever think about stopping, just walking away?" Her throat tightened. He went on, voice low. "I think about it, more than I admit. Sometimes I picture it, getting on a plane, seeing my kid again, pretending I was never here." His eyes darkened. "But then I think about the ones I couldn't save, the ones who still need saving, and I know I'll never walk away." She swallowed hard, silence pressing like a blade. Finally she whispered, "I missed once, I can't miss again." The medic turned, puzzled. "What do you mean?" But she didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. That night she lay awake on the cold floor, staring at the fractured ceiling. The squad's breaths rose and fell around her. But her mind wasn't in the village. It was back in that valley months ago. Her brother's last patrol. She remembered his grin, the way he nudged her shoulder, teasing her for being too serious. She remembered the sound of gunfire, the chaos. And she remembered her shot, the one she thought was perfect, the one that was. She replayed it every night. The angle, the wind, the second she hesitated. And she always ended the memory the same way, with him falling. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced them back. Because tears didn't belong here. Silence did. Dawn bled into the village, painting the ruins gold. Orders came through the radio. Their window was closing. The asset was moving toward the border. They had 6 hours. The squad packed quickly, weary but focused, rifles slung, gear tightened. She moved with them, but her steps felt heavier than the pack on her back. Because in her gut, she knew this mission wasn't just about the asset anymore. It was about proving she still belonged here. That silence hadn't broken her. That grief hadn't hollowed her into a shell. But doubt whispered at her edges. What if the hesitation came again? What if she missed again? And worse, what if someone else paid for it? As they left the village, the medic caught her arm briefly, almost without thought. His eyes met hers, searching. "You're carrying something," he said softly, "more than the rest of us." Her lips parted, words almost breaking free. But then silence. She pulled away, moving ahead. Because some truths weren't meant to be spoken. Some truths only lived in silence. The road stretched ahead, winding toward mountains. The sun climbed higher, heat bearing down. Sweat soaked through uniforms. Dust clung to their skin. Every step echoed with tension. Every shadow threatened. She walked at the edge of the column, eyes scanning, finger brushing the scar on her wrist. And though she said nothing, a single thought burned in her chest, heavy as stone. They thought her spirit would break. But they didn't understand. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was the only thing holding her together. Why did the road always feel longer when you carried ghosts with you? The convoy had long since been abandoned. Vehicles were too loud, too visible. The squad pushed forward on foot, single file along a narrow track that snaked toward the mountains. Dust clouds rose with every step, clinging to sweat-soaked uniforms, burning lungs with grit. The sun was merciless. No shade, no relief. Only the endless heat pressing down like punishment. She walked third in line, eyes never still. Her scope swept ridgelines, tree lines, broken fences along the path. The medic trudged behind her, one hand adjusting the strap on his pack. The sergeant led from the front, shoulders tense, weapon ready. No one spoke. But silence wasn't peace anymore. It was the hum of dread growing louder with every mile. By midday they reached a dry riverbed. The sergeant signaled a halt. Boots sank into pale sand, rifles dropped to low ready, backs leaned against rocks. 5 minutes, he muttered. Canteens opened, water trickled, breaths came rough, ragged. She crouched near the edge of the riverbed, fingers brushing the sand. Tiny ridges caught her attention. Tracks not old. Her pulse quickened. She rose, scanning the opposite bank. Nothing moved, but she knew better. She turned back to the sergeant. We're not the first ones here. His jaw tightened. He looked where she pointed, saw what she saw. Eyes up, he ordered. Instantly the squad stiffened, rifles raised. Silence fell thicker, heavier. For long moments, nothing stirred. Then a glint, high on the ridge. Her scope snapped into place. The sun caught metal just for an instant, then vanished. She inhaled, steadying, breath slowed. But no shot came. Not yet. They pushed onward, slower now, every step dragging tension tighter. Shadows lengthened as the mountains swallowed the horizon. The trail narrowed, rock walls pressing close, a choke point. She hated choke points. Her mind whispered memories of the valley where her brother fell, cliffs above, gunfire raining down, no room to maneuver. Her throat burned, fingers tightened around her rifle. She wanted to speak, to warn them, to tell them this was wrong, this was too familiar. But the words stuck, silence chained her. She marched on. When the ambush came, it was almost merciful. At least the waiting ended. Gunfire cracked from both ridges, ripping into stone, spraying dust into the air. Bullets screamed past heads. Soldiers dove for cover, pressing against jagged rock. The world shrank to chaos, shouts, explosions of dirt, the whistle of rounds splitting air. She dropped flat, scope rising, searching. The enemy blended into rock and shadow, disciplined, hidden. Her breath steadied, heart slowing despite the storm. One target, 2, 3, each shot precise, her rifle barking in measured rhythm. Bodies dropped, but more replaced them. The medic dragged a wounded soldier to cover, hands soaked red. His voice cracked as he shouted for help. She fired again, again. Each pull of the trigger tore another piece of her away. And then silence again. The gunfire faded, smoke drifted, the ridges fell still. But the silence this time wasn't absence, it was aftermath. The squad was shaken, 1 man dead, 2 wounded, supplies running low. The sergeant crouched, map spread across his knee, dust streaking his face. His eyes burned with frustration. They're watching every step, he muttered. They know where we're going. The radio operator tried again, antenna lifted high. Static, nothing. They were cut off, alone. The medic sat nearby, head bowed, hands trembling as he wiped blood from his arms. She stood apart, watching the ridgelines, her silence heavier than ever. Because she knew. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't bad luck. Someone wanted them funneled here. And she couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, it was her fault. That night they camped under jagged cliffs, no fire, no voices. Only the sound of boots shifting, rifles clicking, breaths catching in the dark. She sat watch back to the stone, eyes scanning shadows. The medic approached quietly, lowering himself beside her. "You don't sleep, do you?" he whispered. She kept her eyes forward. "Sleep makes you slow." He studied her in the moonlight, the hard lines of her face. "That's not it. You don't sleep because when you close your eyes, you see something." Her chest tightened. He leaned closer, voice softer still. "What do you see?" She swallowed hard, silence stretched. And finally she whispered, "My brother every night." The medic's face softened. "He was here before." She nodded faintly, words catching. "We were on patrol, ambushed. I hesitated just a second, long enough. He didn't walk away." Her voice cracked, barely audible. "And now, every shot I take is me trying to undo that second." The medic's hand twitched, like he wanted to reach for her shoulder but didn't. Instead, he whispered, "You're not undoing it, you're carrying it. That's different." She turned to him, eyes sharp through the dark. "Carrying it doesn't bring him back." Her voice fell to a broken whisper. "But maybe it'll stop me from losing someone else." Silence pressed heavy between them, heavier than gunfire ever could. The medic finally nodded, eyes glistening in the pale light. "Then keep carrying it for all of us." Morning came gray and cold. The squad pushed deeper into the mountains, legs aching, shoulders bent under weight. Every ridge felt like a threat, every shadow hid a rifle. But she walked steady, eyes unblinking, silence stronger than steel. The medic followed close behind. The sergeant barked orders with a voice grown rough. The wounded soldier limped but kept pace, jaw clenched tight. They were more than a squad now. They were survivors clinging to each step. And she knew they were hers to protect. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was promise. By afternoon, they reached a plateau overlooking the valley below. Through her scope, she saw it, the convoy. Armed men, trucks loaded with crates, and at the center, the figure they'd been chasing all along. The asset. Her chest tightened. This was it. The reason they bled, the reason they lost. The sergeant crouched beside her, binoculars raised. "That's our target. We take him alive." Her jaw locked, alive, always alive. But as she stared through the scope, heart steadying, she saw something the others didn't. The asset wasn't guarded. He was surrounded, yes, but not restrained, not controlled. He was leading them. Her blood ran cold. The trap wasn't ending. It was only beginning. She lowered her rifle slowly, breath caught in her throat. Because in that moment, everything fit. The ambushes, the silence in the village, the tracks at the riverbed. They weren't chasing him. He was pulling them. Her lips parted, but no sound came. And the weight of silence pressed heavier than ever. What do you do when the truth finally cuts through the silence? She stared through her scope, the crosshairs fixed on the man at the center of the convoy. The asset. The one command wanted alive. The one they had chased across ruined villages, through ambushes and blood. But now she saw him differently. Not a prize to capture, not a target to isolate. A lure. Her breath caught, heartbeat slowed. Every ambush, every false trail, every loss. It all led here. She lowered her rifle, fingers trembling against the metal. "Something's wrong," she whispered. The sergeant crouched beside her, binoculars still pressed to his face. "What do you mean wrong? That's him. We've got one shot." Her voice tightened. He's not running, he's waiting. The sergeant frowned, irritation flashing. We don't get to question this. Orders are orders. We move on my signal. Her jaw clenched. Silence burned in her throat like fire. She wanted to tell him everything, about her brother, about the hesitation that haunted her, about the pattern she could see now that no one else did. But the words stuck. She watched as the asset raised his hand, gesturing almost casually to the men around him. Trucks shifted, crates unloaded. Not fear, not desperation. Control. And she knew. This wasn't a mission. It was a stage. They pulled back from the ridge, huddled behind jagged rocks. The sergeant laid out the plan, voice clipped, efficient. We circle wide, come down from the west. Suppression fire, then close in. Priority is capture. We cannot let him cross that border. The men nodded, weary but obedient. She stayed silent, eyes lowered. Her chest heaved with the weight of what she carried. The medic caught her gaze just briefly. His eyes asked the question his lips didn't. What are you seeing that we do? She looked away. Because what she saw wasn't just the enemy. It was herself, caught between silence and speech, between warning them and protecting them, between past and present. And she didn't know if breaking her silence would save them, or break them faster. They moved at dusk. The mountains bled shadows as the squad slipped west, rifles tight, boots soft against rock. The world held its breath, even the wind stilled. She trailed near the front, eyes darting, every muscle braced for the storm she knew was coming. Her mind whispered her brother's last words to her, laughter fading into gunfire. Don't stare so hard at ghosts. But tonight she wasn't staring at ghosts. She was staring at the inevitable. They reached the western ridge just as the convoy settled below, men clustered near fires, their laughter sharp against the night. The sergeant raised his hand. The squad froze. On my mark, he mouthed. Rifles lifted. Her scope fixed again on the asset, calm, collected, moving like a man who had already won. Her finger hovered over the trigger, chest tightening. And that's when she saw it. A flash of movement, not from him, from the ridges above. Dozens. No, hundreds. Enemy fighters already in position, encircling the valley. Her throat seized, her lungs burned. They weren't about to ambush the asset. They were the ones surrounded. She yanked her rifle down, turned sharply to the sergeant. Stop! Her voice ripped through the night, louder than gunfire. The squad froze, eyes wide. They're waiting for us, she hissed, pointing upward. Look, the ridges. The sergeant spun his binoculars, and his face went pale. Movement, figures, rifles glinting in moonlight. The medic swore under his breath. The radio operator muttered, frantic, already trying the channel again. The trap was sealed. The sergeant's jaw clenched, eyes hard. We're already in it. His gaze flicked to her, burning. Why the hell didn't you? She cut him off, voice low, trembling with rage at herself as much as him. Because I've been here before. The words spilled like blood. I saw it coming once, and I stayed silent. I told myself it was nothing, and I lost my brother. Her chest heaved, her silence finally cracked. I'm not losing you too. The squad fell silent, the revelation hanging heavy in the dark. For the first time, they saw her not as the quiet sniper who never spoke, but as someone bleeding inside, every step of this mission a wound. The medic touched her arm gently, his voice steady. Then tell us what to do. Her eyes burned. She lifted her scope again, tracing the ridges, counting positions, breathing steadier now. They want us to come down, to step into the open. That's when they'll close. The sergeant leaned in. So what's our play? Her lips pressed tight. Make them think we don't see them. The plan was madness. But in war, madness was survival. They descended into the valley slowly, deliberate, rifles low, acting as if the ambush above didn't exist. Every step was a gamble, every shadow a threat. The asset watched them approach, calm as ever, hands folded behind his back. He knew the trap was ready. But he didn't know that silence had finally broken. She walked at the front now, scope lifted casually, but every glance traced the ridges. She counted breaths, timed movements, measured distances. Her heart was steady, but her soul trembled. Because one mistake, one slip, and they would all be cut down. And she couldn't carry another body. Not again. They were halfway into the valley when the first shot cracked. Not from the enemy. From her. Her bullet shattered the silence, cutting clean through the first rifle on the ridge. A man crumpled. Chaos erupted, shouts, gunfire. The ambush triggered too early, the circle breaking uneven. The squad dove for cover, rifles blazing. The sergeant shouted commands, voice raw but fierce. Hold them, hold them. The medic dragged the wounded behind rocks, hands already slick with blood. And she moved like a shadow, every shot deliberate, precise. Her silence wasn't hesitation anymore. It was control. Each pull of the trigger was her brother's voice in her ear, steadying her hands. Each kill was a refusal to let silence take anyone else. The firefight tore the valley apart. Dust choked the air, muzzle flashes lit the ridges, echoes rolled like thunder. They were outnumbered, outgunned, every angle against them. But they weren't broken. She crawled through dirt, firing, shifting, firing again. Her body screamed with exhaustion, but her will burned stronger. The asset stood in the chaos, untouched, eyes locked on her. Almost as if he knew she was the one tearing his perfect trap apart. Their gazes met across smoke and fire. And she understood. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was personal. Minutes dragged like hours. Ammunition ran low. Blood-streaked uniforms. The squad clung to cover, breaths ragged, but they held. Finally, the ridges began to thin. Enemy fire slackened. Shouts turned to retreat. The trap was broken. The valley fell silent again, but this silence was different. Not absence, not dread. Survival. The sergeant staggered to his feet, chest heaving, eyes scanning the chaos. His voice broke, but it carried strength. Still alive, all of us. The medic slumped against a rock, bloodied hands trembling. Barely. The squad exchanged weary, hollow smiles. And then their eyes turned to her. The sniper, the silent one. The one whose voice had saved them. She sank to her knees, rifle slipping from her grasp, chest heaving with exhaustion. Sweat and dust streaked her face, but her eyes glistened. Because for the first time since her brother's death, silence didn't crush her. It released her. The medic crouched beside her, hand brushing her shoulder gently. "You carried us tonight," he said softly. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to deflect, to retreat into silence again. But instead, she whispered only one truth. "I couldn't lose you too." The words broke her, but they also healed. Above them, smoke drifted from the ridges. The asset was gone, slipped away in the chaos. The mission wasn't over, the fight wasn't done. But tonight, something had shifted. She had found her voice. And for the first time, she believed it could carry more than grief. It could carry them all. How do you keep moving forward when survival feels heavier than the mission itself? The valley still smelled of gunpowder. Smoke clung to broken rocks, mingling with the metallic sting of blood. The ground was littered with casings, shattered crates, and bodies half hidden by drifting dust. The squad moved slowly through the wreckage, weapons raised, checking every shadow. The sergeant barked short commands, voice rough, trying to hold the shape of discipline. But everyone felt it, the fragility in their steps, the exhaustion dragging at their bones. She walked near the rear, rifle heavy against her shoulder, every breath ragged. But her eyes never stopped moving. because she knew the asset was still out there, and every second they lingered here was another second closer to being hunted again. They regrouped in the center of the valley, crouched in the shadow of a burned-out truck. The sergeant slammed his hand against the map spread over the hood, dust scattering. He's moving east. If he crosses that border, command loses everything. We cannot let him vanish. The radio operator shook his head, sweat dripping down his temple. Comms are still dead. We're blind out here. The medic's voice cracked as he spoke. We've got 2 wounded, too weak to push hard. Supplies are low. If we keep chasing like this, he trailed off, swallowing hard, we'll bleed out before we catch him. Silence pressed between them, heavy as stone. She stood slightly apart, watching the jagged mountains stretch into distance. Shadows pooled in ravines like ink. Every ridge looked like an ambush waiting to happen. She clenched her jaw, throat dry. Because the medic wasn't wrong. But neither was the sergeant. And both roads, stopping or pushing forward, led straight into hell. The argument grew louder, voices fraying under the weight of exhaustion. We're soldiers, not martyrs, one man snapped. If we turn back, he wins, the sergeant shot back. The medic rubbed his face, fingers trembling. What good's the mission if none of us make it home? She listened in silence, chest rising and falling with the tide of their desperation. And then her eyes caught something in the dust. A footprint. Small, precise, fresh. Her heart lurched. She knelt, tracing the edge with her fingers. The sand still shifted beneath her touch. The asset had passed through here not long ago. He wasn't running fast. He wanted them to follow. She stood, voice steady but low. He's close. The argument froze. Heads turned toward her. For once, no one interrupted. They waited. Her silence had weight now. And when she broke it, it carried. If we stop, we die hunted. If we push, we die fighting. The difference, she hesitated, breath catching, is whether his silence buries more than ours. The words hung sharp. The sergeant's jaw flexed. Slowly, he nodded. We move. The march east was brutal. The mountains clawed higher, paths narrowing to jagged ridges where one slip meant a fall into nothing. The sun dropped, shadows deepening, air thinning until every breath scraped like glass. Boots dragged, packs felt heavier. Every sound echoed, pebbles scattering, metal clinking, strained breaths carrying too far. She moved point, scope sweeping, eyes sharp despite exhaustion clawing at her. Her body screamed for rest, her legs trembled, but her silence steadied her. Because silence was the only thing keeping fear from spilling out of her chest. Behind her, the medic stumbled, catching himself against rock. He muttered something under his breath, too soft to hear. She slowed, glanced back. His face was pale, streaked with grime and dried blood. You good, she whispered. He gave a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Define good. Her lips pressed tight, no answer came. Because she didn't know what good meant anymore. Night fell hard. They camped on a ledge barely wide enough to hold them, backs pressed against cold stone, rifles across their laps. No fire, no warmth, only the sound of wind cutting through jagged cliffs. The wounded groaned softly in the dark, their breaths shallow, hands clutching at bandages. The medic worked in silence, his face etched with fatigue. She sat watch again, eyes fixed on the black horizon. The silence felt alive here, pressing in from every direction, broken only by the rasp of wind. And in that silence, her brother's voice returned. 1 second, sis, that's all it takes. 1 second of doubt and it's over. Her chest clenched. She closed her eyes, gripping the rifle tighter. She had doubted once, and she would carry it forever. But tonight she couldn't doubt, not with these men depending on her. She turned her face upward, to the stars blurred by thin clouds. Help me carry this, she whispered into the silence. The wind answered with nothing. But somehow nothing was enough. At dawn, they moved again. The air was colder now, every breath sharp. The trail cut along sheer cliffs, stone crumbling beneath their boots. She scanned constantly, scope sweeping ahead. And then she saw it. A shimmer of movement, just a flicker. Her breath caught. She dropped to one knee, raised her rifle, steadying. Through her scope, the world sharpened. The asset, standing alone on the ridge ahead, a silhouette against the pale morning sky. Not running. Waiting. Her heart pounded, but her hand stayed steady. She could take the shot, end it now. But orders rang in her head, alive. Her finger hovered on the trigger, throat burning. The asset turned just slightly, and she saw his face. Calm, almost curious. As if daring her. Her chest ached. And she lowered the rifle. Not yet. When the squad caught up, the ridge was empty. Only dust stirred in the air. The sergeant cursed, slamming his fist against stone. He's playing us, again. She said nothing. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't just cat and mouse anymore. It was something else. He was pulling them for a reason. And she couldn't shake the fear that the reason wasn't about borders, or politics, or missions. It was about her. That evening, they sheltered in a cave hollowed into the cliffside. The medic collapsed against the wall, wiping his face with trembling hands. The wounded lay near the entrance, breath shallow, eyes half closed. The squad looked broken. But in their eyes, when they looked at her, there was still something. Not just trust. Dependence. She sat with her back to the cave wall, rifle across her lap, eyes heavy but unblinking. The medic sat beside her again, voice soft. You think he knows you? She swallowed hard. I don't know. He studied her face, shadows cutting sharp lines across it. But you think this is more than a mission. Her silence answered for her. He nodded slowly. Then maybe that's why you're here, not us, you. Her chest tightened. Because part of her feared he was right. And part of her knew it. Outside, the wind howled against stone. The mountains groaned in the dark. She sat awake long after the others fell into restless sleep, her eyes fixed on the black horizon. The silence wrapped around her, colder than any night she'd known. But this time it didn't crush her. It fueled her. Because now silence wasn't absence. It was preparation. And when the time came, she would break it again. Not with hesitation, but with purpose. What happens when the mountain itself begins to feel like an enemy? The air grew thinner the higher they climbed. Every step felt stolen, pulled from lungs that could barely expand, legs that trembled under packs heavier than reason. The stone under their boots cracked and shifted, threatening to give way. The squad moved like ghosts now, hollow-eyed, bodies stiff, faces gray with exhaustion. Every word was shorter. Every glance carried weight. She walked point, rifle raised, eyes scanning every ridge and shadow. The silence wasn't just outside now, it lived inside her, steadying her hands, focusing her breath. But she knew how fragile it was. Because silence could hold you together. Or it could snap. By midday, the sun burned bright against bare stone, no cover for miles. Heat pressed down like punishment. Sweat stung her eyes, but she didn't lower her weapon. The sergeant finally called a halt, waving the squad into the shadow of a rock outcrop. His voice rasped, nearly gone. 10 minutes. Hydrate, breathe. The medic dropped heavily beside her, pulling at the strap of his pack. He was thinner than when they started, cheeks hollow, lips cracked. His hands shook as he passed her a canteen. She hesitated. He noticed. Drink, you need it more than me. Her throat ached with thirst. She wanted to gulp it all down, but she only took a measured sip, letting it linger on her tongue before swallowing. Then she handed it back. The medic smiled faintly, always rationing, even with water. Her lips twitched, always with silence. His smile faded, Yeah, that too. They sat there in the heat, side by side, two shadows in a war that felt endless. The break ended too soon. They moved again, every man dragging, every step louder than it should have been. And then the shot came. A single crack. Sharp, distant. Dust burst from the rock inches from the sergeant's head. Contact, he roared, diving. The squad scattered, pressing flat against the slope, rifles swinging upward. Her heart thudded, eyes narrowing behind her scope. She scanned ridges, shadows, the flicker of movement. And there, the glint of glass. A sniper. Not the asset, someone else. The mountains exploded with echoing fire. Bullets shattered stone, sparks flying. Shouts rang out, the medic dragging one of the wounded deeper into cover. She dropped to her stomach, rifle steady. Her finger hovered on the trigger, breath slowing. One squeeze, one silence broken. The sniper's head lifted. Her shot rang out. The echo carried, then died. Silence returned. But it wasn't peace. It was warning. Because if there was one, there were more. They pressed forward after, tighter now, rifles always up, nerves frayed raw. The mountains felt alive, every crevice a throat waiting to swallow them, every gust of wind whispered threat. By evening they reached a gorge, narrow, jagged, walls rising like prison bars. The sergeant hesitated at the mouth, eyes hard. This is a kill box. No one argued, because they all knew he was right. Still, there was no other path. And as they filed in, her chest tightened, every instinct screamed. Halfway through, the ambush came. The world erupted. Gunfire raked the gorge, muzzle flashes sparking from ledges above. The squad dove for cover, shouts colliding with thunderous echo. Stone exploded around her, shards cutting into her skin. She pressed low, firing upward, sighting quick, deliberate. Men shouted, grunted, fell. The medic screamed for help, dragging another body back. Her world shrank to sound and silence, fire and stillness. Her fingers squeezed, released, squeezed again. Every shot another second bought. But they were surrounded. Pinned. And then she saw him. The asset. Standing high on the ridge above, calm in the chaos, eyes locked on her. Not firing, not running. Watching. Her chest seized. Because she knew now. This wasn't just an escape. This was a test. The firefight dragged, minutes stretching like lifetimes. The squad fought with teeth and desperation, clawing their way deeper into the gorge, bleeding but unbroken. And slowly the fire lessened. One by one, the attackers fell back, shadows slipping into the mountains. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was emptier. Colder. She staggered upright, chest heaving, ears ringing. Around her, men lay bleeding, groaning, pale in the fading light. The medic worked frantically, his hands slick, voice cracking as he called for help that wouldn't come. She turned her eyes upward. The ridge was empty now. The asset was gone. Night fell heavy, pressing into every wound. They found another cave, deep and jagged, and carried the wounded inside. The medic collapsed once they were down, hands shaking uncontrollably, blood caked into the creases of his skin. The sergeant sat against the wall, face streaked with grime, eyes hollow but unyielding. He's bleeding us out, that's the game. No one argued. Because they all knew. They were pawns in someone else's silence. She sat apart, back against stone, rifle across her knees. Her hands shook as she cleaned the weapon, not from fear but from something deeper. Anger. Not at the asset. Not at the mission. At herself. Because somewhere, somehow, this had become personal. And personal was dangerous. Her brother's face haunted her again, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream she couldn't hear. 1 second, sis, 1 second of doubt. Her chest burned. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eye until stars burst behind her lids. The medic slid down beside her, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He didn't speak at first, just sat there, breathing, existing. Finally, softly, "You carry him with you, don't you?" She stiffened. He didn't wait for an answer. "We all carry ghosts, yours just seemed louder." Her throat worked, but words wouldn't come. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled photo, a child's drawing, smeared with dirt, a stick figure with big hands and a smile. "My kid drew this before I left, said it was me holding the sky." He gave a weak laugh. "Funny, right? I can't even hold a rifle steady anymore." She stared at the drawing, her chest tightening. He looked at her, eyes tired but clear. "We all break. Question is, what do you do after?" She said nothing, because she didn't know yet. Sleep didn't come that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the asset's gaze, calm, unshaken, piercing through her silence. Why her? Why not the sergeant or the medic or anyone else? Why did he keep looking at her, as if this was more than mission, more than war? The silence had no answer. But she felt it. Something was coming. Something only she could face. At dawn, they moved again. The gorge narrowed further, stone walls pressing close. The wounded dragged their feet, leaning on shoulders, faces gray. The medic pushed forward despite shaking hands. Every step echoed, every breath felt stolen. And she felt it building, the weight in the air, the silence before a storm. Then the sergeant stopped, raising his fist. Ahead, the gorge opened into a plateau, wide, empty. Too empty. Her breath caught. This was it. The crucible. She could feel it in her bones. And somewhere out there, waiting in the silence, was the asset. Watching. Testing. Her hand tightened on her rifle. Her heart pounded. Because she knew the truth now. This wouldn't end with orders. This wouldn't end with chains. This would end with her. What do you see when the silence finally breaks? The plateau stretched out like a scar carved into the mountain. Flat, bare, exposed. No ridges to shield them, no cover to cling to. Only wind sweeping across stone, carrying dust like whispers. The squad stood at the edge, weapons raised, eyes scanning every shadow. No one spoke. Even the sergeant's voice was gone now, swallowed by the gravity of this place. She stood at the front, rifle tight against her shoulder, heartbeat slow but thunderous in her ears. She could feel it, the weight of eyes on them. He was here. Waiting. Minutes dragged like hours. The squad shifted, tense, sweat streaking dust across their faces. Every gust of wind felt like a trigger. And then movement. He stepped into view. The asset. Alone, no guards, no soldiers. Just him, calm as if he'd been waiting all along. He walked slowly across the stone, stopping only 20 yards away. His hands were empty. His eyes were fixed on her. No fear. No panic. Only recognition. The sergeant raised his rifle, teeth bared. "On the ground," he roared. The asset didn't move, didn't even glance at him. He spoke, his voice low but carrying across the plateau. "I've led you far enough. Now it's her turn." Her chest clenched. Because he wasn't talking to them. He was talking to her. The squad erupted with shouts, orders, questions, confusion. But she heard none of it. Only the silence between them. She stepped forward, past the sergeant's outstretched hand, past the medic's desperate whisper. Rifle raised, breath steady. The asset watched her, expression unreadable. Finally he tilted his head. "You carry it well, the weight." Her throat tightened. She forced her voice out, steady but raw. "You've killed too many, this ends now." A faint smile touched his lips. "Do you really believe this is about numbers?" Her finger twitched against the trigger. But something in his eyes stopped her. Not defiance, not arrogance, recognition, as if he saw her silence and understood it. The sergeant's voice cut sharp behind her. Take him now. But her hands didn't move, because something inside her had shifted. She remembered her brother's last look, the fear, the silence that followed. She remembered every doubt, every second she thought she had lost herself. And now, standing here, she realized this was the moment. The silence could break, or it could hold. The asset stepped closer, slow, deliberate. They sent you because they knew. You and I are not so different, both carrying ghosts, both bleeding in silence. Her jaw clenched. You don't know me. His eyes softened, almost pitying. But I see you. You fight as if you're already gone. That is why they fear you. The sergeant barked again, voice cracking. Soldier, end this. Her finger pressed against the trigger. But she hesitated. Not from weakness. From choice. The plateau seemed to hold its breath. Wind died. Dust stilled. Every sound fell away. Her silence filled the space. And in it she saw her brother's face, not in death, but in life. Laughing, alive, telling her not to waste the seconds she still had. Tears burned her eyes. For the first time she spoke not to him, not to the squad, but to herself. No more ghosts. Her rifle lowered. The sergeant roared, "What are you doing?" The squad shifted, weapons rising. But the asset only stood there, still, unflinching. She stepped closer, closing the space between them. Every step was choice, every breath defiance. When she stopped, only a yard separated them. He whispered, almost tender, "You understand now. Silence isn't weakness, it's strength. It's the weapon they never see." Her hand tightened on the rifle. But her voice was calm, "And it's not yours to wield anymore." Before he could move, she swung the rifle, butt striking hard against his temple. He crumpled to the ground. Alive. Silent. The squad surged forward, binding his hands, dragging him to his knees. The sergeant cursed, anger burning in his eyes, but he didn't stop them. The medic caught her gaze, his chest rising with shaky relief. She said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The march back down the mountain was slower, heavier. They carried wounds, carried ghosts, carried silence thicker than before. But the asset was bound. And she walked point again, rifle across her chest, head high despite the weight in her bones. It took days to reach extraction. Helicopters thundered overhead, rotors whipping dust into storms. Medics rushed to the wounded, voices shouting against the roar. The sergeant handed the asset over to command, his jaw set, eyes refusing to meet hers. The medic lingered, giving her a look she would never forget, not gratitude, not pity, but understanding. And then he was gone too, swallowed into the noise. She stood at the edge of the landing zone, wind tearing at her clothes, dust blinding her eyes. For a moment she closed them and listened. Not to the machines, not to the shouting, not to the chaos, but to the silence beneath it all. The silence that had carried her through every moment, every doubt, every ghost. The silence that had broken when she chose. Not for vengeance, not for orders, but for herself. The helicopter door slammed, the world shook. And she opened her eyes. The mountains stretched behind her, endless, brutal, eternal. She had entered them with ghosts at her back, silence in her chest. Now she left with both still there. But they were no longer chains. They were hers to carry, hers to wield. As the helicopter lifted, dust swallowing the ground, she sat in the roar, eyes closed, face calm. She didn't need words. She didn't need noise. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.